April 17, 1943, Maknassi Pass, Tunisia. War isn't quiet. War doesn't wait. And today, war just got humiliated by a 2,000-pound scrap of American steel. The Africa Corps moved through the desert like ghosts, silent, low, disciplined. These were Germany's finest, the men who brought Europe to its knees. But today, they were about to get absolutely violated by something that shouldn't exist. Not a tank, not a bomber, not some secret Allied weapon forged in a lab. No, a Jeep. Picture this. You're crouched behind a rock, rifle ready, sweat burning into your eyes. You trained your whole life for honor, strategy, precision, and suddenly you hear it. Not a Panzer engine, not a British Matilda tank, a purring, smug little engine that sounds like it's laughing at you. Then it appears, bouncing across the desert like it owns the place. No armor, no roof, no fear, just a dirty green shoebox with wheels, and it's faster than anything you've ever seen. You think, what idiot would go to war in that? Until your squad gets outflanked in 14 seconds by 6 of them, swarming your position like mechanical hyenas. Fast, ruthless, surgical, no mercy, no hesitation. They don't fight like soldiers. They fight like wolves. Browning machine gun swinging, engine screaming, sand exploding. Your men don't even have time to shout before they're pinned and surrounded. There is no German word for what just happened, but there's an American one: domination. And right there, in the dust, in the heat, in the total humiliation, Germany learned something terrifying. This Jeep wasn't a vehicle. It was a goddamn problem. A problem so big, so embarrassing, so unstoppable, that Hitler himself put a bounty on it.
April 17th, 1943, 1740 hours, somewhere outside Maknassi Pass. The Americans didn't waste time with speeches. They didn't bark insults. They didn't parade their victory. They disarmed the Germans faster than a factory assembly line strips scrap metal. Clean, efficient, emotionless. Carl Weber watched them work and realized something unsettling. These weren't the clumsy, lazy Americans German propaganda talked about. These men moved like they had done this 1,000 times.
April 17th, 1943, 1740 hours, somewhere outside Maknassi Pass. The Americans didn't waste time with speeches. They didn't bark insults. They didn't parade their victory. They disarmed the Germans faster than a factory assembly line strips scrap metal. Clean, efficient, emotionless. Carl Weber watched them work and realized something unsettling. These weren't the clumsy, lazy Americans German propaganda talked about. These men moved like they had done this 1,000 times. A Jeep skidded to a stop in front of Carl. The driver hopped out, helmet low, sleeves rolled, a strip of chewing gum in his teeth, like he had zero respect for the desert or the war. He looked maybe 20 years old, just a kid. He tossed a cigarette to one of his buddies and said, "Bag 'em, tag 'em, move 'em." That was it. No ideology, no hate, just work. War to them was industrial. Carl's squad was lined up and searched. Dog tags taken, rifles tossed onto a growing pile of captured weapons. A U.S. officer with a clipboard walked past, barely looking at them as he spoke. 10 prisoners, no wounded. Push him to transport. They were no longer soldiers. They were inventory. But Carl wasn't looking at the Americans anymore. He was staring at the Jeep. 2 of them idled in front of him, engines running smooth as sewing machines. The desert had killed half the German vehicles in the region. Sand clogged air filters, heat destroyed radiators, gearboxes died from dust. But these things?
These things looked like they didn't even notice the desert existed. One of the Jeeps had a bullet hole through its hood. Another had dents all over the body. One wheel was clearly bent. And yet, they still ran. Impossible, Carl thought. Then he saw something that made his stomach tighten. A metal toolbox was strapped to the side of the Jeep. Just a few wrenches, pliers, a screwdriver, a hunting knife. That's not a military repair kit, Carl muttered under his breath. That's a farmer's kit. He stepped closer without thinking. A U.S. guard shoved him back. "Keep walking, Fritz." Carl didn't move. He pointed at the Jeep and said in rough English, How does it run like this?" The American shrugged as he slung his Garand rifle over his shoulder. "Runs 'cause it's supposed to." "What do you mean?" The American smirked. "It ain't complicated. Fix what breaks. Don't overthink it." He climbed into the Jeep, tapped the dashboard twice, and drove off like a man riding a loyal horse into battle. Carl didn't move for a moment. Then he whispered to himself, "Machines don't fight for you. This one does." As night fell, the prisoners were loaded onto a supply truck. Carl sat in the back with his hands bound, watching the Jeeps through the slats in the wooden panel. Engines humming, headlights cutting through the dust. He had spent his entire life believing in German engineering, precision, perfection, flawless mechanics built by flawless minds. But now he had seen something terrifying, something ugly, simple, relentless, something built to win. And for the first time in the war, Carl Weber felt afraid of a machine, afraid of what it meant, afraid of who built it, afraid that Germany might lose. He didn't know it yet, but this Jeep would follow him across the Atlantic, into prison, into history, and into his grave. A scouting platoon moved in to secure the convoy. Helmets low, rifles ready. Their boots crunched over broken glass and shell casings. Every man expected traps. Every shadow felt like a sniper. That's when one of them saw it. A small shape, low, olive drab, parked halfway behind a shattered truck. Not British, not German. Something strange. A vehicle. A captured American vehicle. One of the soldiers called out, confused, "Was ist das?" They approached cautiously, rifles raised. It sat untouched, engine still warm. The paint was perfectly smooth, the tires thick and deep-tracked for terrain, rugged, compact, efficient. A metal plate on the dashboard read, Willis M.B., U.S. Army. They called it a Jeep. The desert fell silent. The German lieutenant stepped forward, boots sinking into sand. His face was calm but curious, the kind of curiosity that comes before a storm. He looked at the mechanics in his unit. "Get our best man." Minutes later, he approached. The man who would become the witness of this story. A hardened Africa Corps mechanic, a quiet man who had repaired everything from Panzer transmissions to half-tracks crippled under artillery fire. He valued one thing above all, German engineering superiority. To him, nothing built by Americans could match German precision. He opened the hood of the Jeep, and in that moment, everything he thought he knew about war, about engineering, about Germany's future, began to crack. Because inside the Jeep, nothing made sense. No complicated layout, no overworked metal, no delicate instruments, no need for specialized tools, no complex firing systems. Everything was simple, brutally simple. The kind of simple that only comes from genius. The wires were color-coded, every component labeled, Bolts were standardized. Fuel system, basic but unbreakable. Air filter, field ready. Spark plugs, accessible in seconds. Everything was designed for a farm boy to fix in a trench under enemy fire. It wasn't just a vehicle. It was a revelation. And as he stared under that hood, surrounded by the emptiness of the Sahara, he realized this machine wasn't built for comfort or elegance or beauty. This machine was built to win wars, and Germany had nothing like it. He didn't say a word, but the wind carried a message across the dunes, a warning from a silent enemy. America wasn't just fighting with soldiers. America was fighting with factories. And for the Africa Corps, that changed everything.
The morning sun rose over the wrecked supply column, turning the desert into a sheet of molten gold. The sand was littered with broken crates, torn canvas, and bullet-riddled fuel drums leaking into the ground like bleeding metal. Crows were already circling overhead. They always came after battle. Feldwebel Karl Weber wiped a line of sweat from his brow. He stood over the captured American Jeep, hands on his hips. He was a battlefield mechanic, attached to 9th Leichte Afrika Division, and he had seen hundreds of vehicles in his life, but never one like this. It looked crude, ugly even. Flat panels, box frame, simple canvas roof. No German engineer would dare make something so plain. But it had survived this ambush. Their own German vehicles hadn't. Behind him, Oberleutnant Franz Richter, their reconnaissance officer, tapped the Jeep's hood impatiently. "Can we use it?" Karl didn't answer immediately. He just stared at the Jeep. Most vehicles he encountered in Africa were stubborn bastards, delicate, over-designed, temperamental in the desert heat. But this thing, this box on wheels, felt different. It still smelled like gasoline and tobacco. It still looked alive. "We'll see," he finally answered. He pulled the hood latch and lifted, and then he froze. For the first time since he had been drafted into the Wehrmacht, a machine made him feel insulted. It shouldn't have been possible. The engine compartment was immaculate. Everything was labeled. Wiring was color-coded. Bolts were standard size. Parts could be removed in minutes without special tools. This wasn't German engineering. This was something else. Behind him, the other mechanics gathered around. "Mein Gott," muttered Dieter, his assistant. "Even the oil filter is easy to reach." "Look," Karl said, pointing to the layout. "No engineering arrogance. Everything is simple, practical, purpose-built." "This isn't engineering," Hans scoffed. "This is farm equipment." Karl shook his head. "No, this is war equipment." He pulled the choke and turned the ignition. The engine started on the first try. No grinding, no sputtering, just a smooth, controlled rumble. The men stepped back. Karl revved the engine skeptically. The Go Devil engine responded instantly. Tough, simple, uncomplaining. "How is that possible?" whispered Dieter. Karl didn't answer. His pride was at war with his reality. The Jeep worked. Better than anything he'd seen in North Africa. He looked around at the damaged column. One of their own Kubelwagons sat nearby, its suspension destroyed, its radiator cracked, its engine choked with sand. The German vehicle represented precision engineering, but this American Jeep represented something far more dangerous. Industrial ruthlessness. This thing wasn't built for elegance. It was built to be multiplied.
"This changes everything," he muttered. "What?" Carl didn't respond. Instead, he reached into the glove box and pulled out a maintenance manual. His blood went cold. The instructions were written so simply that any idiot could service this machine. Hans leaned over his shoulder and laughed bitterly. "They wrote these for peasants." "No," Carl said slowly, eyes narrowing. "They wrote this to win a long war." He stood up straight, feeling something he didn't want to feel: respect. Far off in the dunes, artillery thundered again. Their war wasn't over, not by a long shot, but something had changed. He could feel it. Back at camp, the captured Jeep became a sensation. Officers argued over who would get to use it. Mechanics from other units came to inspect it, each wearing the same stubborn frown, trying to hate it, failing to. The Afrika Korps prided itself on endurance, discipline, and elite fighting spirit. They drove their vehicles until the suspensions broke and engines died in the sand. But they had always believed German design was the best in the world. Now, staring at the Jeep, Carl knew that was a lie. During field testing, he tried to break it. He overloaded the cargo. It kept moving. He drove it over rocks. It didn't complain. He cut through sand dunes that swallowed the Kubelwagen alive. The Jeep didn't even slow down. After 2 days, Carl sat alone beside the Jeep late at night, turning a wrench slowly in his hands. He looked at the simple stamped steel body. No curves, no elegance, just brutal efficiency. He hated it. He admired it. He feared it. This machine wasn't just a vehicle. It was a warning. If America builds everything like this, we can't win this war. A cold desert wind blew across the camp. He closed his eyes. For the first time since the war began, Carl Weber felt the first seed of doubt.
Night fell over the desert like a black curtain, swallowing the wreckage of tanks and burnt supply trucks in silence. The wind had died down, but the smell of diesel, cordite, and scorched metal still hung heavy in the air. The front line had moved on, but the ghosts of battle lingered. Feldwebel Carl Weber crouched beside the captured Jeep inside a dim tent lit by oil lanterns. Maps and scattered tools covered the ground around him. He hadn't slept since they found it. His mechanics had gone back to their bunks, but he remained, obsessed, silent, and grim. He was tearing the machine apart, piece by piece, not to repair it, but to understand it. Normally, when he touched machinery, he felt pride, order, logic. But this Jeep, it felt wrong. It shouldn't work as well as it did. It shouldn't be this easy to strip down, rebuild, and run again. War machines were supposed to be complicated. Maintenance was supposed to take hours. Broken parts were supposed to slow armies down. But this thing, this American bastard machine, was designed to make war faster. Carl ran his hand along the transfer case and four-wheel drive lever. Even that was genius in its simplicity. German Kubelwagens had decent engineering, but no four-wheel drive. They relied on clever differential tricks. This Jeep just brute-forced physics with all four wheels. Crude, savage, effective. He turned, hearing footsteps approach. Oberleutnant Franz Richter entered the tent. "You're still working?" Richter asked. Carl didn't answer. He just kept his eyes on the Jeep's exposed engine. Richter sighed. "You look like you want to strangle it." Carl finally spoke. "It shouldn't exist." Richter frowned. "Meaning?" "It's not engineered like a German vehicle," Carl said. "There was no elegance here. Everything is cheap, rough, mass-produced." "And that bothers you?" Carl looked up,
face lit by lantern glow. "It terrifies me." Richter crossed his arms. "The men love it. They're saying if Rommel had 1,000 of these, he'd already be in Cairo." Carl laughed darkly. "Try 10,000, and he might make it to Jerusalem on the way." Richter leaned closer. "You're saying this Jeep is better than our Kubel wagon?" Carl didn't answer. He didn't have to. His silence was enough. Richter exhaled slowly. "Then write me a report." "Oh, there will be a report. But nobody will like it. Make it anyway." Richter turned to leave, but paused in the doorway. "And Carl?" "What?" Richter's face hardened. "Don't let the men see you afraid." Captured truth. The next morning, Carl gathered his mechanics around a table made from ammunition crates. He unrolled a sheet of canvas and placed 2 objects on it: a Kubel wagon drive shaft and a Jeep drive shaft.
"Study them," he said. Hans lifted the German part. Precision machined, perfectly balanced, light. Beautiful engineering. Then he picked up the American drive shaft. It was thicker, rougher, ugly, like it had been hammered together by someone who didn't give a damn how it looked. Dieter laughed. "This looks like blacksmith work." Carl pointed. "Which one do you think survives a landmine blast?" The laughter stopped. He slammed the Jeep part on the table. "This isn't beauty. This is war. This thing isn't made for parades. It's made to be built fast, driven hard, and survive hell." He pulled open a crate and dumped more parts on the table. Jeep axles, air filters, fuel pumps. "All standardized," Carl said. "Interchangeable across every Jeep they make. Do you understand what that means?" Hans frowned. "Factories can replace parts fast?" Carl shook his head. "No, it means they can build an army faster than we can destroy it." Silence. Nobody laughed now. The report Berlin won't want. By evening, Carl sat hunched over a crate with a fountain pen, writing by lantern light. Technical summary, U.S. Willys MB, field assessment. Conclusion, the American Jeep is not a vehicle, it is a strategy. He wrote about cold start performance, excellent. Engine access for field maintenance, exceptional. Parts interchangeability, revolutionary. Shock absorption over rough terrain, superior. Fuel compatibility, runs on almost anything. Serviceability by anyone with basic tools, dangerous advantage. He hesitated before writing the final line. His pride didn't want him to write it, but his duty forced him to. Recommendation, immediate study and adoption of similar principles, or within 2 years, we will be overwhelmed by American production capacity. He signed it, Feldwebel Karl Weber, Afrika Korps, Vehicle Maintenance Command. He hated what he wrote, because every word was true. Desert Trial. 2 nights later, Rommel's corps moved under the cover of darkness, withdrawing deeper into Tunisia under constant British pressure. The Jeep came with them. During a night convoy, they reached a dune slope that stopped the German column cold. Trucks bogged down, half-tracks struggled. The Kubelwagens died in the sand one by one. Richter looked back at Carl. "Test it." Carl climbed into the driver's seat. The engine came alive instantly. He threw it into 4-wheel drive and drove straight up the dune. Effortlessly. The entire column watched. Nobody spoke. Nobody needed to. The truth was now obvious. Germany's engineering pride had just been outmatched by American practicality. And Carl knew this was only the beginning.
Night convoys in the desert were a special kind of hell. Engines overheated, transmissions locked, and sand clogged every machine built by men who had never seen real war. The Afrika Korps had learned a long time ago, the desert doesn't kill you with bullets first. It kills your machinery. It kills your hope. Then it kills you. But one machine refused to die. The Jeep. A machine that keeps moving. Carl sat behind the wheel, knuckles white as he gripped it. The desert wind slapped his face, gritty sand stinging his skin. The Jeep growled beneath him, steady, obedient, unstoppable. He crested the dune and circled back down when something caught his eye, half buried in shadow near a dry, waddy trench. A Ford GPA amphibious Jeep, another American design, half sunk, abandoned. More of them were here, more than one. The Americans had left equipment behind like trash, not because they were careless, because they had so much of it. They didn't need to go back for it. Carl stared at the machines for a long time. Germany could barely replace trucks lost in battle. America left them behind like empty ration tins. Night fire. Tracer rounds cut suddenly through the darkness, thin red streaks whipping past like angry meteors. Artillery thundered a moment later, mortars exploding across the column. Ambush! Take cover! Chaos erupted. Men scrambled, falling into the sand face first. A shell annihilated a truck nearby, sending a flaming tire spinning into the sky like a drunk comet. Screams tore through the smoke. Richter slid down behind Caro. British artillery, move, move! We can't. The Hoff tracks are stuck. Leave them. Caro looked at him in disbelief. Abandon armored vehicles? Impossible. Richter pointed forward. Get the Jeep through and flank them. Find their forward observers. Carl nodded once. Mission clear. He hit the accelerator. The Jeep surged forward like a beast hungry for the hunt. They tore across the sand while artillery shells bloomed behind them. Marek manned the MG-34 on the back seat, teeth clenched against the recoil. Bullets zipped past, kicking up dirt. Carl heard metal rip and prayed it wasn't the engine block. But the Jeep just kept going. How was this thing still running? Marek yelled over the gunfire. Because the Americans built it to survive idiots, Carl shouted back. They dipped into a ravine, bouncing so hard the suspension growled but held. The Jeep didn't complain. It wanted more, like a wolf scenting blood. They spotted the British artillery team, 5 men operating 2 25-pounder guns. No time for finesse. Carl floored the pedal and the Jeep lunged across the sand ridge like a charging hyena. Marek fired first, cut down the spotter. Carl swerved hard as the British crew reached for rifles. Richter stood and fired the MG straight from the hood, muzzle flash lighting his face in bursts of flame. Men fell, shouts died in throats. The last artilleryman pulled a Webley revolver and aimed. Carl didn't break. He hit the man full force at 50 kilometers per hour. The man left the ground and vanished beneath the tires. Bones snapped. The Jeep shook, but only once. Carl exhaled slow and steady. The battlefield went quiet.
The question nobody wanted to ask. They limped the Jeep back to camp at sunrise. Blood was still splattered across the front bumper. Every other vehicle in the convoy had broken down, blown a gasket, snapped a drive shaft, or simply failed. The Jeep had lived through it all. Carl stood alone for a long time, staring at it. Covered in mud and smoke, a bullet hole in the hood, rope hanging off the side. But the Jeep still ran. It always ran. Why? It was a simple question, but the answer shook Carl to his core. Because American engineers expected their machines to be abused, expected them to be shot, drowned, crashed, overloaded, and still keep going. Germany designed vehicles for engineers. America designed vehicles for war. The realization. Carl finally wrote what he had denied until now. We are not fighting the American army. We are fighting the American factory.
Suddenly, the war made sense. Why the Americans didn't care if they lost vehicles, they could build more. Why they didn't fear long supply lines, they had trucks for every road. Why they didn't slow down, even the mechanics were farm boys who could fix anything with a wrench and a hammer. The United States had brought something to war that Germany never could. Unstoppable momentum. And Karl Weber, son of a Bavarian blacksmith, master mechanic of Rommel's Afrika Korps, knew what the generals did not. Germany could win battles, but America would win the war.
A week later, Karl found himself inside a dusty command tent lit by 2 flickering lanterns and a single oil stove. The desert wind clawed at the canvas as if trying to tear it apart. Outside, Afrika Korps soldiers cleaned weapons and coughed diesel from their lungs. Inside, Germany's secret shame lay on a table. A captured American Jeep, taken apart like a corpse on an autopsy table, and everything inside it was a problem. The meeting no one wanted. A gray uniformed colonel stood stiff, smoking through clenched teeth. Across from him, 4 mechanics, including Karl, waited silently. "Begin your report," the colonel ordered. Richter stepped forward and clicked open a folder stamped Technische Beurteilung, Vertraulich, Technical Evaluation, Confidential. Inside were sketches, tear-down notes, test logs. Marek spoke first. "The engine can be removed in under 30 minutes using only 2 tools. Color-coded wiring makes electrical repairs possible even under low light. Parts are standardized, interchangeable from one Jeep to another." The colonel didn't blink. "Continue." Karl pointed to a gearbox on the table. "This is the transfer case. Engages 4-wheel drive instantly. Simple lever system, minimal moving parts, extremely rugged." The colonel grimaced. "And the drawbacks?" Karl paused. He knew this moment mattered. He chose his words carefully. "There are no significant drawbacks, Herr Oberst." Silence. You could hear sand hitting the canvas. An inconvenient truth. A junior officer stepped forward angrily. "Impossible! Nothing is perfect." Karl leaned forward. "Perfection is not the point. The Americans engineered for battlefield conditions, not comfort, not engineering pride, function." He pointed to the Kubelwagen engine on display next to the Jeep engine. The comparison was humiliating. "Our vehicle is elegant, precise," Karl said. "Theirs," he held up a Jeep carburetor, "works every time." The colonel stared at him. "Your conclusion?" Karl exhaled slowly. "The Jeep is the most effective light war vehicle in existence." A long, heavy pause. The colonel crushed his cigarette into a metal cup. "Write it up. Keep your analysis factual, and keep it quiet. This does not reach Berlin in this form." Richter blinked. "Why not?" The colonel leaned in close. "Because the High Command does not like embarrassment." Censoring reality. Karl stayed late that night writing the report. It felt less like a technical document and more like a confession of defeat. The Jeep displays unmatched simplicity of design, mechanical resilience, and strategic utility. It operates in mud, sand, and snow with minimal maintenance. German equivalents fail under equivalent conditions due to complexity and production limitations. At the bottom, he signed it. Unterofficer Karl Weber, 2nd Technical Battalion, Afrika Korps. He slid it forward, but the colonel's adjutant stamped it immediately. Modified Ford transmission. Entire paragraphs were crossed out in red ink. New lines were added. The Jeep is crudely built, inferior in German engineering sophistication, but acceptable for temporary use. Karl stared in disbelief. "They're lying," he said. "Yes," said Richter. "Officially." The whisper network began. But here was the problem with truth. Once spoken aloud, it spreads. Mechanics began passing quiet warnings. Drivers traded rumors over cigarettes. Tank crews joked that when their Panzers broke down, they wished for a Jeep to tow them home. Men in Rommel's army now believed something dangerous. The Americans were not inferior. They were overwhelming. Not because of better soldiers, not because of better tactics, because of production. Berlin reacts. 3 weeks later, Berlin finally received a version of the Jeep report. Karl never saw the full reply, but he saw pieces. Someone leaked internal responses to the mechanics. It was a list of comments handwritten by some faceless logistics officer in Berlin. It read, "Investigate methods to simplify German light vehicle production. Re-evaluate Kübelwagen field performance. Pursue captured Jeep usage until domestic alternative available. Urgent. America mass-producing Jeeps at industrial scale. Verify report." Then underlined 3 times in red. "Immediate study required. Evidence suggests America is waging the war with factories." Rommel found out. The next evening, Karl was summoned. He entered the general's vehicle park where machines slept under tarps. General Erwin Rommel himself stood there, hands behind his back, staring at a Jeep. Karl snapped to attention. Rommel turned, face unreadable. "So, you are the mechanic who wrote the Jeep report?" "Yes, Herr General." Rommel walked to the Jeep, ran a hand along the hood, then said, "I don't care where a machine comes from. If it works, we use it." He faced Karl. "Tell me honestly, can Germany build something like this, at this speed, in this quantity?" Karl hesitated, then spoke the truth. "No, sir." Rommel nodded just once. He already knew. That night, Karl wrote in his personal field journal, "We are losing this war. Not today, not tomorrow, but inevitably. Because you cannot outfight an enemy who can build faster than you can shoot." Weeks after the surrender, American troops began clearing battlefields. A Jeep patrol rolled through what used to be the German defensive line outside Machnassi. They passed burned-out Kübelwagons, shattered artillery, rifles buried in dunes. One Jeep slowed. A corporal hopped out, walking across the sand to a still shape half buried by wind. A body, German uniform, hands still clenched around a rifle, frozen in the last moment of resistance. Next to him in the sand were Jeep tire tracks. The corporal knelt and brushed the sand from the dead man's collar. Mechanic insignia. He didn't know his name. He didn't know his story. He didn't know this man once fought, not with hatred, but with pride. The corporal stood, removed his helmet, and gave a moment of silence, not for an enemy, but for a soldier. He returned to his Jeep. The engine started. The war rolled on. Karl Weber was never mentioned in a report. He never got a medal. No books remember him. No stone bears his name. He died exactly as he lived, fighting against the impossible. And history buried him just like the desert did. But the jeep rolled on. To Sicily, to Italy, to Normandy, to Berlin, to history. And long after the smoke of war faded, long after the flags were folded, long after the last veteran's heartbeat ended, the truth remained. Germany built machines for engineers. America built machines for war. And war doesn't care what's perfect, only what survives.